And a wellness budget or wellness measures. You might well have heard the wellbeing and budget talk leading up to now, because other countries have considered wellbeing within that broader economic plan, namely New Zealand. Dr. Cressida Gaukroger is a Senior Policy Advisor of Wellbeing at the Centre for Policy Development. Dr. Gaukroger has worked on these measures and analysed wellbeing and how you improve it and measure it in places such as the UK for many years, so she brings a lot of experience to this discussion this morning. Dr. Gaukroger, thanks so much for your time today on Mornings.
Thanks so much for having me.
So first of all, for those who hear wellbeing or wellness budget and wonder, is that pie-in-the-sky esoteric stuff? What is it and how do you incorporate it into dollars and cents of a federal budget?
Well, I mean, well-being, different to wellness. So well-being is about having the capacity to live good lives, whether that's being healthy, safe, having secure housing, having access to communities, friends, education, all the things that make kind of life worth living. And a well-being budget, we often talk about, spending, what you're spending on, but actually it's about smart spending. So it's about looking at the things that you're spending money on and saying, is that actually increasing the quality of life for Australians, or is it serving some other function? And there are things beyond spending as well that a wellbeing budget can do. So, for example, tax can be used to encourage more of the things that we want and less of the activities that are, reducing wellbeing in the community. And there are also structural things. So, for example, departments get their own budgets, but in wellbeing budgets in other countries, departments are often encouraged to share their budgets because the kinds of things that affect our quality of lives go across silos. They're not just health, they're not just education, all of these things intermingle, and smart policies that say things like, if we want improved health outcomes, we're going to have to look at the environment and pollution. If we want better educational outcomes, we're going to have to look at the health of kids and whether they've got secure housing. So in that sense, it's also about smart spending because it looks upstream, it looks at the causes rather than symptoms. So it's really important that budget money is spent in part on treating the immediate needs of people. But smarter budgeting, smarter wellbeing budgeting says, how can we try to reduce the number of people who have chronic immediate needs right now by doing things like reducing air pollution to reduce rates of asthma or things like that?
Some really interesting examples there. I was listening to a report over the weekend which highlighted just in recent times the previous Treasurer, Josh Frydenberg, belittling at the time the Treasury spokesperson for Labor, Jim Chalmers, about the concept of a wellbeing budget, making, I guess, lighthearted jokes about the whole concept. How much do you have to get people, and how much work is there to get people to consider this whole idea seriously if it's something that a country like Australia doesn't have?
I think it's surprising that people won't belittle it. Over half the OECD countries have a wellbeing framework of one kind or another. We see rich and poor countries across the world, and with conservative and liberal governments bringing in wellbeing measures to budgeting, to government and beyond. And so Australia is a little bit of an outlier in this respect. And no matter who you are, no matter what your politics are, surely what you really want is an improvement in the quality of lives for Australians now and our children and our grandchildren. And so a wellbeing budget or a wellbeing approach to government is really focusing on what's the best way of achieving that and what's the best way of making our economy work for people rather than making our people work in service of the economy.
I'm already getting quite a few messages from listeners responding to my earlier question, Dr. Gaukroger, about, well, what if you had a priority or two that you could spend money on from the federal government? Quite a few people have said homes for the homeless, social housing, further health improvements. Is that tying into a bigger picture wellbeing budget that will solve what you said earlier? What is better wellbeing for all of the community to have a better life, not just a better profit margin or a lower rent, etc.?
Yeah, I mean, I think they're all great ideas. So things like homes for the homeless not only solve immediate wellbeing problems for people who are unable to find shelter, but they also deliver actually really good budget outcomes. If you look at countries that have given homeless people housing, unconditional housing, as opposed to spending lots of money on stopgap, non-permanent solutions. So everybody actually benefits overall when these things are done smartly. But I don't know if there's one thing I would spend the money on other than encouraging departments and research and unique thinking to try to solve some of these problems by taking a step back and thinking, what's actually causing some of these health problems? What's actually causing some of these, social net problems where people are unable to have enough security to have a stable place to live?
Yeah. Dr. Cressida Gaukroger is Senior Policy Advisor of Wellbeing at the Centre for Policy Development. She has international experience, which she's recently brought back to Australia, on looking at analysing what a wellbeing budget is, how you measure it, and how it will improve your life and mine. It's a bigger picture way of looking at spending public money in some ways, and I'd like to hear your response to it and whether you think this is a welcome development that the federal government is bringing in this budget tomorrow night. 1300 681 666, the phone number to call. Given this is our federal government's first go at incorporating this wellbeing measure or component into a budget, what are a couple of principal things you'll be looking at, Dr. Gaukroger, given you've also analysed this overseas?
Well, I mean, this is very much a first step, and it's worth saying that, even a wellbeing budget is very much a first step. We need change kind of across government, the way that our systems function, to actually get them to serve the wellbeing of Australians. But we'll be looking at things like whether or not there is a commitment to putting wellbeing at the heart of some of the economic decision making. So how you analyse policy proposals. Do policy proposals have to tell you whether or not they're actually contributing to overall well-being of Australians, or is it just bottom line numbers? If it's just bottom line numbers, then it hasn't moved far enough in the direction of being a well-being budget yet. And we know that this is a first step for the government under pretty tough circumstances. So we'll be interested to see what are the first steps that they're taking now, particularly with a commitment to taking a long-term approach to budgeting and thinking about the kind of spending that lasts beyond election cycles.
So will you be looking for at least some sort of set of measurements or an outlay of language of how the government will establish this, and then what it will check year on year the data against to see if wellbeing measures are improving?
Yeah, I mean, I think, they won't be able to deliver a set of measurements within the budget, but they can commit to, for example, increasing funding for the ABS, so they can run a centre, start running a set of measurements. But, the best set of measurements, and we hope to see this from the federal government, is one that's determined by the people. We know, Australian communities are at the heart of knowledge about what is most important to them, what's the kind of Australia that they want to see, and what's the kind of Australia they want to see for their children and their grandchildren. And a commitment not only to measurement, but to community consultation at every step of the way is going to be really important for getting this right.
Have you had much input since you came back to Australia a couple of years ago, or provided any submissions to the federal government on this, given they're going to tackle it for the first time?
Well, we've been talking to not just federal government, but governments across Australia, and there's some really interesting work being done in Canberra as well. They're quite advanced with their wellbeing framework. But absolutely, we're sharing our research. We're discussing the direction in which the Treasury might be going. Obviously, there's only so much
of course.
That we can do, but certainly letting them know about what's going on in other countries, and particularly what are the kinds of things that work in terms of promoting change that leads to real outcomes for citizens.
It just strikes me sometimes, and through COVID years as well, the response from listeners I've received is people are thinking beyond just how much money they can save or make. It seems there's more of a thirst, and correct me if I'm wrong in the end, more of a thirst for people to be more content and to be less focused on growth and their own personal assets. Is that a sentiment you get?
Oh, absolutely. And I think, money only takes you so far. If you're not living in a community where you have other people you can rely on, if you're not living somewhere where you feel safe or you're protected from pollution, where you feel like your children have an opportunity to play with other kids and get a good education, then money's not going to solve those problems. And if you're throwing money at that, then you're throwing money at the symptoms of the problems rather than getting governments to focus on stopping those problems from arising in the first place. So particularly with COVID, I was speaking to my aunt recently who lives alone, and she was talking about the incredible experience she had of living in a community where her neighbours checked up on her, where they helped deliver food when she needed it. And that kind of support meant that her lockdown experience in Melbourne was not a particularly negative one. Whereas other people I know who didn't have those community connections, who didn't feel those supports, had deeply traumatic lockdown experiences, deep loneliness. And those are the kinds of things that you can't buy. It's about building communities, building support for those kinds of social connections.
Some really interesting points, Dr. Gaukroger, and I know you'll be looking at these sort of measures and the way that this whole budget is framed compared to previous years. Thanks for reflecting on your knowledge and your experience on this today.
Thanks so much for having me.
Dr. Cressida Gaukroger, who is Senior Policy Advisor of Wellbeing at the Centre for Policy Development. She's worked in this area in the UK, amongst other places, through many years as well. I think if we want to look at the well-being of a community, says Beck, in sectors such as health and education, a good start would be looking at the well-being of teachers, nurses and AMBOs. The well-being of these groups are currently dire, and the community suffers because we do. Interesting point, Beck. That